Hello, everyone! I'm so glad you've decided to join my open lesson today, whether just to watch or to paint along with me. I spent a long time thinking about this subject and decided on a black and white landscape. This will help us tune into the watercolor medium and recall its core characteristics, fluidity, and that wonderful sense of freedom. Without the distraction of color, we can focus purely on tone and enjoy classic watercolor effects. We'll be painting a landscape with a large white tree and some figures. I didn't even print the photo reference for this, as I took only a little inspiration from it. The photo reference is attached below. You can take a look. What I loved here was the large white tree, which looks so striking against the dark forest behind, and the lovely delicate bridge, where I decided to add the figures. I also added a reflection in the lower part. For this piece, I chose a square format. And I'll do the tonal sketch on a square format too. I always advise making tonal sketches, even for seemingly simple subjects that don't require super long or deeply contemplative thought. Nevertheless, having a tonal sketch in front of us makes structuring the final work much easier. So on my square format, I'm placing the elements, marking where the large tree and the bridge will be. Now I'm toning the upper part and will later lift out the light area. With this dark tone, I'm stopping short of the bridge. The paint will likely still flow down, as I'm holding the paper at a slight incline. If you don't want such a strong flowing wash, you can always lay the paper flat. Then your paint will stay exactly where you put it. And here in the center of this dark patch, I want to lay down a denser tone because it will give a sense of a distant tree line. Perhaps some mountains far away, but this will make the whole large wash more complex. We can even give it a more interesting silhouette. It will feel like distant trees. And now I'll lift out the light tree itself. I'll paint it using the technique of a bloom or cauliflower wash. We'll talk about that in the lesson. Right now, it's important to understand that the tree must become a light silhouette against the dark sky and forest. So here I'm deliberately darkening the tone more so that my tree reads better and looks more contrasty. My bridge ended up a bit lower than it should be. I'll adjust it now. I'm adding hints of the riverbank boundaries here. These are the patches of ground under the snow that my bridge rests on. As always, I adjust the pencil drawing until I'm happy. Once all objects are arranged by mass and the size is right, then I can stop. On the tree, I'll sketch the trunks and branches. I'll work with a pencil, so the lines are more uniform, more similar to real natural forms. A brush gives a line that pulsates in width, so it's less suitable here. In the lower part, I'll define an unfrozen section of river. It will be darker than the snow on the sides. We can tone it a bit now, and also tone I want this foreground to frame the composition from below. So the white space doesn't just trail into emptiness. And we have a tonal patch here too. Whenever I work on a new sketch, I think about the movement of the viewer's eye, about how the viewer will comfortably explore the scene. That's why I create an entry point. I'll place some strokes here. And through the lower left corner, the eye will enter the scene. Then it will move towards the main figures. Will there be one figure or two? I haven't decided. I'll draw two for now and we'll see. I'll also add their reflection in the unfrozen stream. I won't draw the bridge details yet. But overall, the composition seems successful now. There is a focal point. The focal point will be the figures and their reflection. As a counterpoint, I place the large tree crown along the diagonal, and the viewer will start from the lower left corner, travel along the reflections in stream to the figures, and then exit the composition through the upper right corner via the tree crown. I think it all looks harmonious and successful. Now let's talk about brushes and paints. For this subject, I won't need a very large set of brushes. First, a wide brush to wet the paper. It can be a round brush or a flat hake brush. Next, a few medium-sized brushes. These could be synthetic watercolor brushes or natural hair brushes, and a fine brush for working on the delicate bridge elements and the figures. I'll also use a fan brush to create texture in the middle ground, in the large dark area behind the tree. In this way, using water spatters, we'll create snow effects, since this course is all about snow. And since the subject is monochromatic, we can use any dark shades from your palette. It could be indigo or a neutral gray. Lamp black could work. There's a color by Shein called Ivory Black. That one is suitable. Absolutely any dark shade will do. We won't be mixing colors here. My color is called Neutral Gray. It has a slight, barely noticeable purple undertone. That's why I really love it. It looks somehow more lively and pleasant. But as I said, you can use absolutely any dark color from your set. And now I'm transferring my sketch to a large format. First, I'm outlining a large tree. I'm sketching it in as a general mass like this, because here, the watercolor will paint itself, creating a bloom. A bloom, and what it will ultimately look like, I don't know yet. I'm also sketching the bridge. Here, I really want to play with the contrast of the large, massive tree. This open space, the landscape part, and the neat little human figures. So we're making the bridge quite small too, proportionate to the future figures. I'm making it with a slight incline, with a curvature. I'm making it slight curvature. In my photo reference, my bridge is completely straight. But here I feel like adding more plasticity, sketching the banks left and right. Perhaps I'll move the tree a little to the right. Maybe make the bridge a little bit higher, and in the foreground, I will have a patch of unfrozen water. Darker than the snow at the edges. I'm largely inventing it, so its shape can be anything, it's up to you. And here, as I said, with such light strokes, I will create an entry point into the composition so that our gaze enters through the bottom left corner. We can also sketch the divisions in the bridge railing. There should, of course, be equal distance between them. Well, that's essentially my entire pencil drawing. Now I'll be working on the upper section of the composition. I need to wet the entire sheet and lay down the tone for the distant plane. Then I'll add the tree crown with droplets of water, creating a bloom. I'll also add, while wet, some tonal framing for the painting here. And then I'll start detailing the work on dry paper. Wetting the sheet with a wide brush. Mine is made of goat hair. If you have a separate brush just for wetting the sheet, it's very convenient. It's always clean, therefore, you don't need to rinse it before working with water. I wet the sheet twice because the air in the room is dry, and the wash dries very quickly. Now it just needs to sit for a couple of minutes, maybe even less, to let the water start soaking into the layers of cotton paper. So there isn't a puddle sitting here, and my initial wash doesn't all run down. Meanwhile, I can mix a color for the sky. The shade should, of course, be dark, because the bloom effect works when around the lightest object. There is a dark, dense background. And I'm waiting a little more, so that my bloom works and the tonal wash doesn't run down too much. And I begin creating the first wash. A sufficiently dark mixture, as you can see. Of course, it will lighten, because watercolor fades as it dries. We all know that already, and we need to keep this moment in mind a little when we mix the shade. At the bottom, I want to get a softer edge like this, so I add more water to the brush. To create a sense of snowy drifts here, a feeling of soft transitions, soft touches between the background and the snow. Removing a hanging droplet that has noticeably pooled here. There's a hair into the brush, can also be removed now. While the wash is still wet, it won't leave a mark. And in the central part of the wash, I'd like to make an even darker tone, so it isn't so uniform, to give a sense of some trees in the distance. So greater depth appears in the work, and additionally, the bloom would look more effective. That is, hinting that there's something back there in the background. Here, such a sharp border has formed between the snow and the background, and I want to soften it a bit, make it softer. Here I'm lifting a little of the tone so that my bridge will read better later. And overall, I'm happy with this wash. Now I can wait just a few more seconds and start creating the crown of our tree. For this, I take a smaller brush, and just with water, I need clean water again here. I start dripping onto the wash. As you can see, the water pushes the pigment out of the paper. And here, it's important that you can rotate your sheet and create a crown the way you want, so that the water spreads sideways in the crown. Doesn't just become vertical runs, but a large bloom. And any excessive runs can simply be picked up with the brush. While there's moisture in the lower part, I can change things at correct. It will all look light, softly diffuse, and the work will only benefit from it. A thin bloom at the bottom we can remove. Now, I want to lay down a bit of a sense of the bank. So, my bridge rests on areas that are darker in tone. And on the left side as well. If a sharp edge forms, I can soften it for now. Overall, the paper still has a lot of moisture, and I just need to lightly pass the brush to soften an area. And now, I want to spatter the background with a fan brush to create a sense of falling snow. You can spatter with a round brush here too. The main thing is to first tap it against the palette, so the large droplets go onto the palette, and only the fine spray goes onto the work. And such atmospheric spatter, the feeling of snow, I really like. I think it adds charm, complexity to the subject, so I often use this technique. Another thing I want to add wet on wet is pencil strokes for tree trunks and twigs. Of course, such a bloom needs to be detailed to show within it. Details so the viewer understands what it is. And I really love adding strokes, little details with a pencil. On wet paper, the pencil works a bit differently. It creates a more complex, dark line, and I always take advantage of that. You can use a regular pencil, you can use colored pencils. Even watercolor pencils will work here, so it's all up to you. A brush gives a line that is more varied, thicker in some places, thinner in others. But here, to show such trunks and twigs, which we see very far away, we need a material that creates even, uniform lines. So here I'm using a pencil specifically. And I'm adding these elements in the area where I have the light bloom. You can place little dots here and there. It will give a sense of leaves that haven't fallen yet. But it's better not to overuse any technique too much. Add it in places and then stop. This is the tree I ended up with. It's behind my future bridge, so here, it comes to the level of the railing. And now I also want to add tone to the lower part of the composition. To do this, I'm wetting the snow in the foreground. And adding a dark patch wet on wet. Well, that's enough for me. Now I need to dry the drawing and move on to working on dry paper. For detailing the bridge, I'll need a brush like this with a long tip. Its advantage is that it gives a long line of uniform thickness. At the same time, it's not very thin, it's about 3 millimeters thick. And with it, I'll draw the bridge support. It shouldn't be too skinny. We need to show its load-bearing part, the part people walk on. Don't make it too dark so it becomes a blackening line. We don't want that. But you can leave small gaps in it here and there, creating a sense of little snow patches. Lying on this beam in places. And we lead it to the opposite bank. And now I take a brush like this, which gives an extremely fine hairline. For me, it's a calligraphy brush with a long tip. You can use any fine brush, and with it we'll create the pattern on the railings. First, I'll show and create the vertical posts, the rhythm that I love to use in drawings. Remember, right, that between these posts there should be equal distance. And now I start laying down the railings themselves, drawing a line that defines the bottom of the railing. You can also break this line up a bit so it's not super straight. Super perfect! This will be a metal structure. Maybe it's leaning a bit in places, there's snow on it, so these lines can quite legitimately be broken. And now I'll create an ornate pattern like this. I decided to make it similar to what I see in my photo reference. I'll make diagonal lines like this, first from one corner to the other, and then repeat each line above and below. And of course, it's important that they are parallel. This requires super fine, delicate work. This is the bridge I ended up with. Now I want to draw a figure, and then the reflection, or rather the patch of unfrozen water and the reflection. Oh, and I also need to show that this bridge, like any other bridge, doesn't have one railing, but two, one closer to us, the other farther away. They mark the walking path of the bridge, so I'll show near the supports in the distance a hint of another row of these vertical posts. Like this. And now I need to add a character to my scene, one or several. It's up to you. To make the character look cool and convincing, he's the focal center here. I'd advise you to practice drawing people on a draft first. Let's do that. Any thick paper will do, and we need a not too large brush, again with a sharp tip. When I draw people at this scale, very small figures, I need to show the proportion of head to torso in a way that the head looks very small. In an adult, the head fits into the torso 8 times. So I draw a small dash for the head, and then start building up the volume of the clothing. Here we're depicting people or a figure in winter clothing. So we can show a large volume like a coat or fur coat. And we can draw not very chubby little legs. We can also show a figure leaning on one leg. This could be a character. We can show, for example, a girl. Let's draw her with loose hair. We won't show the boundary between head and shoulders and give her some sort of short jacket. Pants, and we can add a stroller nearby. I'm building up images with silhouettes like these. And here I need thin intersections for the wheels, a handle for the stroller. We can draw a man, for example, a couple, a man and a woman. For that, the figure should be a bit larger, bigger. We can put the man in a hat. And a male figure has much broader shoulders, so here we need to build broader shoulders, a more powerful torso, and correspondingly narrower hips. So a male figure would look roughly like this. These are the characters we can add to our scene. They can certainly be both children and adults. There can be several. There can be a single girl. It's all up to you. And it's important to get the figure proportions right for the specific image. Most often, bridge railings are made higher than the midpoint of a figure. Then the center of gravity is lower than this top rail, and a person can't lean over and fall over the railing. So don't draw the head too high. Let's draw it at about this height. Building up the silhouette, building up the volume of the coat, showing thin little legs. You can show something like a scarf blowing in the wind to make the silhouette more interesting. And now I'll make the water, a dark patch of water, and the reflection from this figure. Mixing a shade, not very dark, and laying it down directly on dry paper, the unfrozen patch. And while still wet before it's set, my first layer hasn't dried yet, I'll add the reflection. Here you can also add a bit of reflection from the tree, also drip some water. It will create a bloom and give a sense of that reflection, of that light crown. Here, a slightly darker tone is laid down instead. And in the end, I decided to add a friend for our heroine after all. I'll draw him now too. I thought the figure looked too lonely. By the way, you could add a dog here. That would also be a wonderful walking story. But I decided to add a man. And now I'll sketch the head a little higher. Such broad shoulders. And this is the romantic couple I ended up with. For the characters, we of course need to add a reflection too. Now, as I said, in the foreground, I need to create an entry point into the composition through any kind of leading lines. You can lay them down with a thin brush, you can add them with a pencil, The main thing is that from the left corner towards the patch of water, we have such visual guides. They can be very fine, like little cracks in the ice. They might repeat somewhere in the water. But in any case, I've created the entry point into the composition. It's clearly through the bottom left corner. And then we follow the ice hole, reach the characters via the reflection, and exit the composition at the top through the tree crown. I'm sure that this subject will turn out completely uniquely for everyone. This is a technique that's hard to copy, hard to repeat exactly, but that's what makes it interesting. Be sure to share your works. I'll leave a hashtag under the lesson that you can add if you post your drawing on Instagram. And those who will take this course further can attach their work to the lesson. I will definitely comment on it.